Hi, Madhu.
Hey,
good morning.
Good to see you.
Good morning, all ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arazi. I'm the founder and managing partner of FinTLV Ventures, a global leading Insurtech VC. I'm happy to be here today with you. As we gather here for Insurtech Insights, it's clear that we are living in a world where cyber risks are evolving at a breakneck pace. Cyber attacks are on rise, with sophisticated criminals looking for any vulnerability they can exploit. And as technology continues to evolve and data and AI platforms are getting into any part of our lives, ChatGPT, etc., we must be ready for the next wave of cyber threats that could arise. So in this context, the importance of cyber insurance cannot be overstated. And for almost 2 decades, this industry has been providing protection against cyber risks. But it's only in recent years that it has truly come into its own. And with a projected CAGR of 25%, cyber insurance is now, I think, one of the fastest growing segments in the insurance industry. And it's not hard to see why. We can all see where we live now. But however, this growth comes with its own set of challenges. And building adequate cyber insurance capacity is one of the most significant obstacles facing this industry. And it's a challenge that we must overcome if we are to truly secure the future. So we must look back to the early days of property cat innovation, where the industry had to create new solutions from scratch and apply those same principles to the cyber insurance industry. We at FinTLV Ventures believe that cyber insurance is one of the most exciting and promising areas in which to invest. As we engage in this fire chat today, I hope to shed some light on the challenges we face, the solutions we are developing, and the exciting future of the cyber insurance industry. So allow me to introduce Madhu Tadikonda, CEO of Corvus, one of our portfolio companies. Under his leadership, Corvus has become one of the leading cyber insurance companies globally, and we're thrilled to have him join us today to this fire chat. So before we dive into our discussion, I would like to invite Madhu to briefly introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background and expertise.
Great, thank you. I wish I could see anybody, but it's pure fog. But so I actually started my career.
It's snowing now?
Yeah, right. It could be. So I actually started my career in consulting and venture capital, really focused on data science, but outside of insurance. And it was maybe 12, 13 years ago, I took a happy, lucky right turn into the insurance industry when I became the first head of data science for the commercial insurance business at AIG. And it was tons of data, all kinds of things to exploit, models need to be built. And 2 years into that, then I changed roles and became the chief underwriting officer globally for all of the property and casualty lines, which was even more interesting, was figuring out how to actually apply models and data, and especially where sort of human judgment and models needed to come together. And that's always, I think, the more interesting part of versus just model building. And we used to have a line which was, rather than adding artificial intelligence, you can usually create more value by eliminating natural stupidity. And so it's a kind of very humbling where you're building sophisticated models, but really thinking about how they work in practice, whether it's underwriting, distribution, or claims. Just a couple quick takeaways from my AIG time that I think will set the stage for cyber. One, AIG is the perfect insurance university. They've done every product in every country for 100 years, had every triumph and made every error. So it's like a great place to learn everything about insurance. But there's a second part too, which really became clear to me that information and data is really the critical competitive advantage of insurance carriers. Yeah. The fact that you've got incident and claims data is really the core asset. It's not balance sheet, it's not anything else, and that's, I think, the best firms will figure out how to capitalize on that. But the last point was I had a very sort of sober view, and it's a little countercultural in this conference, but a very sober view that it was basically impossible for Insurtechs to compete head-to-head with incumbents in trying to get customers. That in most commercial lines, 90% of the good customers renew with the incumbents. You can either underprice or get the sort of bad accounts if you want to build, but that sort of inertia actually really plays to the advantage of the incumbents. And then finally, there really would never be something like an Uber of insurance because people actually just don't want to interact with their insurance company that often. So anyway, that was kind of my view, and I'll explain why I ended up having to eat all these words later with Corvus and cyber.
Thank you very much. So let's get started.
Yeah.
I'll start with this 20 years, okay? So cyber insurance has been around for almost 20 years. Why it has been jumping into the headlines for the past couple? So what is different? Yeah,
no, there's like that old Hemingway line, which is like, how do people go bankrupt? It's like gradually and then suddenly. I think this was one of those, actually an AIG invention of cyber insurance that had been around for 20 years. It was an errors and omissions product. It was covering things like credit monitoring when credit card information was stolen. But generally was not really in the forefront and was usually sold alongside other lines. There wasn't a lot of data captured in underwriting about what policyholders look like, and there wasn't really a very rich taxonomy to think about claims and mapping the two together. If anything, it was, if you had credit card data, you might get an extra surcharge, but otherwise it was pretty generically underwritten. And it was running at a low loss ratio, so nobody cared. Why dig into something? Why mess with success? And now, meanwhile, in the last 20 years, companies were getting, as you guys know, more and more reliant on digital operations, becoming more and more virtual. Their data and IT assets were more valuable. And so that was happening in the background. And then 3-4 years ago, there was basically this sort of perfect storm where enterprising entrepreneurial criminals realized that they could hack into systems pretty easily and either freeze them or steal data and collect ransom payments, and they could do that sort of up and down and at scale. That really was what caused that brought it to the forefront.
Data and exposure.
That's right, and the Bitcoin economy to make transaction payments easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good. So, what factors are driving the growth of cyber insurance business? So we saw a huge report of Gallagher and others that the CAGR is huge. We're going to cross all the cat exposure in the next years with cyber exposure and projected CAGR of 25%. How will this impact the insurance landscape in the coming years?
Yeah, no, I think it really is this catch-up that people woke up and realized, wow, I'm connected with all my vendors. If I go down or these systems go down, I might be out of business.
Yeah.
And I care more about the digital blueprints than I do about my factory and those sorts of things. So it's a little bit of a catch-up of really something that was underinsured and getting more focus. If anything, I think it's sort of the capacity and insurance markets that are trying to figure out how to underwrite this properly that are probably holding back some of the growth just through that, more on the supply side.
Yeah, so, yeah, and also the increasing frequency, I think, is part of the equation here.
Yeah, that's right, and it's like a constantly evolving, even ransomware is kind of yesterday's news, and you can't underestimate the sort of entrepreneurial energy of hackers, and now it's moved much more to social engineering, business email compromise, wire funds transfer, and there's a constant cat and mouse game as the new thing goes.
So if you're there, if you're not there, you're not there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now let's move to the underwriting side. Okay. So what's needed for a cyber underwriter to be a successful one? Is that even possible, given the dynamic nature of these threats?
It's a good question, and I do think you have to have some humility about how quickly it's evolving. And what that does mean is, there's lots of parts of insurance that are all built on how much you know and what you've known over the last 30 years. Right. We're constantly looking and testing what can you figure out with imperfect information, the threat vectors change, and it kind of changes the whole nature of how you operate. But there's a few things that I think are pretty different, and it's sad that just as this risk was coming to the forefront for policyholders was when a lot of traditional carriers said, we don't understand the data, we don't understand how this works, and pulled away just when the need was greatest. And I think that's what kind of created opportunities for companies like ours. But and by the way, we focus in lots of different segments, but the one that's richest right now is kind of the mid-market, $20,000, $25,000 premium, where we can really differentiate with the policyholder experience and help advise the policyholder about what they need and what for their industry, what to trade off. And so within that segment, I think there's a few components. One is, with 7, 8, 9 years of data of incidents and claims, again, coming back to that core asset, we think we have the richest data asset of actual attacks and frequency and severity. And there's no ISO, companies don't publicly report this stuff. So that is sort of a crucial data asset. And we go back and basically reconstruct what any policyholder or company looked like before an attack. We scrape all the loss runs from every submission that sort of come through our hands, and then supplement that with sort of data from the dark web, threat information, and put that all together. So that's sort of the core kind of data asset that I think is fairly unique. The second part is we have 45 human underwriters that are cyber underwriters, and anybody who's trying to hire these guys knows how hard it is.
What's the type of these underwriters? Are there more technology guys?
It's a combination. I mean, they tend to be younger, and I was going to say the sort of joke, or I guess it's not really a joke, it joke's on us, but is that the starting ask salary for a cyber underwriter is their age plus a 0. And so basically, it's as much as the data, getting that talent pool together and holding on to them, training them, and it is a very sort of curious bunch of some cybersecurity, some data science, some insurance expertise, come together. And so that's actually turning out to be one of the most crucial assets in figuring out how to trade. The last one, though, I think that is critical, which is then also just sort of breaking the mode of the traditional insurance carriers, is you have to stay in constant engagement with the policyholders. You have to know what they're running. You need to look outside and see where threats or attacks are developing, be able to go back to your policyholder and say,
so
hey, wait a minute.
You need to monitor it all the time, right?
Exactly. And the typical insurance carrier, and it's not just AIG, I think it's not too far from average, may have policyholder contact information for 30% of customers or so. And the brokers never let you contact them even with that. And from design, and I think this is part of our heritage of insurance and kind of data and tech coming together, we've insisted on policyholder contact information, the broker support to do that. And that's really turned out to be critical for during the kind of 365-day term. You find attacks, you have responsive policyholders, and you actually intervene on their behalf. And we're finding there's almost a 15-point loss ratio difference between the sort of third or 40% of policyholders who engage with us, respond to alerts, take our recommendations versus
this
others.
Is very highly proactive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's right.
Interesting. So let's move to digital assets
for
a second, because it's something that everybody is now dealing with. So how do cyber insurance policies protect digital assets? And what steps can businesses take to ensure they have comprehensive coverage?
So digital assets are a tricky one, because some of these are attacks where a ransomware, somebody freezes your system and is trying to, threatens to expose data or wants a ransom payment. Now, some of the most insidious and probably some of the top hackers are really just trying to come in and not leave a trace. So it's come in, take blueprints, come in, take contract terms, negotiation components, and you may never even know that they were in or out. And that's a much more challenging one. But the Sony Pictures cares a lot more about the James Bond script being stolen than their factory. And so really giving the right recommendations for how to protect those assets and sort of the right, and it's constantly evolving again, sort of the perimeter and security around those is a critical part of this.
Okay, we have a few questions.
I'll get
them.
As long as no one asks what Web3 is.
We only have 7 minutes. So one very important question, I think, for the discussion is, what are some of the biggest challenges in building adequate cyber insurance capacity, and how is the industry working to overcome them? I think.
Right. No, look, I think when losses started spiking and ransomware, which wasn't really modeled, came, and again, unfortunately, exactly when customers were more interested in this is when I think the carriers and capacity dried up. And it's sort of a general view of, hey, this wasn't modeled, we're not getting good answers to any questions, so the enterprise risk management kicks in and capacity disappears.
Right.
I think that's starting to come in a bit more now, as people are realizing, I mean, at that point, it was the pure fear of what happens if Google Cloud goes down for 3 weeks and we have limits losses everywhere. Like, is this even insurable? I think now, kind of a couple of years after that, people are understanding, hey, there are companies that are more resilient versus others. You should be able to give a price incentive for those. Even when there's very correlated or core system vulnerabilities, it's not that everything goes down at once. There's really kind of almost like an industry of ransomware, where somebody finds a vulnerability, sells that to somebody who creates an exploit. There's almost like this sort of Nigerian prince email layer where you have to then email and try to threaten and freeze everything. Now, that doesn't happen instantaneously. It's not weeks, but in 24, 48, 72 hours, if you see that activity happening, you can go back to policyholders and actually try to close things down. So even these things of sort of the systemic events, I think people are realizing they're not as scary as many people thought.
Okay, there's one question I need to answer here, because We've been asked if the Israeli tech ecosystem really trustworthy partnering ecosystem for continental Europe players in cyber, given recent hiccups like Pegasus. So I'd like to take this very shortly.
Yep.
I think the answer is absolutely yes. There is a difference between attackers and protectors. And you can see the biggest cyber companies in the world are companies like a Checkpoint, like Palo Alto Networks, which protects almost every company that sits here. And of course, there are the attackers that can be used for not good purposes, like Pegasus. I think that you need to make a huge difference between these two. And I think that Israel is also blessed with a lot of security programs and platforms that helps all the organizations globally to protect their assets. I have another question for you, Madhu.
Okay.
Can you share some insights into the challenges faced by cyber attackers, and how is cyber insurance industry working to stay ahead of these evolving threats that are?
It's an interesting thing, and we always have this debate internally of, is it easier or harder to predict cyber attacks versus things like earthquakes?
Right.
And it's constantly changing with cyber attacks, but you can put yourself in the minds of a cyber attacker. They want to make as much money as possible with as little effort as possible.
Customer acquisition cost.
Right, that's right. So you can't reverse engineer the psychology of an earthquake or that stuff. And so if you keep that in mind, that's sort of trying to find the easiest way to do things, you can start predicting how a hacker will look at a company. What are signs of weak security? What are signs of sort of easier marks and that kind of thing, and try to defend against those. And again, you can't take this risk away entirely,
right.
But it's what are the best kind of highest ROI interventions you can do to protect yourself. And then knowing that, again, that humility of wherever you squeeze, it's going to come out someplace else.
Exactly. That's the best 2 cents that we can provide, yes? Every business that is not protected, you should start doing your measures to protect yourself, because when the attacker will come and see that you're starting to get protected, he will move to the next guy that is not protected. It's the customer acquisition cost much lower.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. We have 3 more minutes. Let's move to the regulators.
Yes.
So what role do regulators play in shaping the development of the cyber insurance market, and how are state and national governments working to promote cyber risk management?
I think that connection is not perfect yet. And I do think that very critical asset that probably the more modern cyber insurtechs have, that is the incident and claims data and the frequency and severity data, can be very valuable. Which is, we really know, and even the companies you mentioned, the CrowdStrikes, Palo Alto Networks, why do they come and spend time with us? Yeah. It's, we know what actually causes frequency and severity, and we kind of do on masked basis, what are the actual interventions and highest ROI actions. And that, I think we can start communicating with regulators more, which are, what are the kinds of things companies should do, and then some view on, these are attack vectors, how do you sort of share that knowledge? But there's not a great instrument for that now, and in general, information sharing is pretty weak.
Yeah. So there's interesting questions from the audience. What does Corvus think are the most important factors in estimating and evaluating systemic cyber risk?
It's an interesting one. So I think even our thinking at Corvus is changing. So there was a view, which is what happens if Google Cloud goes down, and I probably overuse this quote, but there was a guy who was running Cyber Command in the Pentagon, who doesn't anymore, who's saying, look, if Google Cloud goes down for 3 weeks, you probably haven't eaten for 2 weeks. These are like pretty resilient systems compared to other things. The parts of things we worry about are things like 70% of auto dealers run the same dealer management system. And some of them run it in a hosted way, some run it on premises. If you are overexposed to that software system, which is actually like a juicier, more accessible target for a hacker, and you happen to have a portfolio that has too much of that, the whole world economy won't come down, but you'll have a really bad day. So that's the kind of sort of aggregations and things we're kind of monitoring.
Yeah, so I think, to summarize it, I think that in other CAT events, we are looking for diversification. And we're already starting to have diversification in the digital world with different networks, different providers, different cloud providers. And this diversification will eventually protect us from a huge CAT event, we hope. Yeah?
That's right.
Okay, I think we ran out of time.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Madhu.
Yeah.
And thanks you for joining us today.
Great. Went by fast.